of our online faith formation classes. So last week we learned about Abraham and God's faithfulness and how through scripture and through the story of God and his people, God has always showed to us that he keeps his promises and that he's faithful. And this is shown through the story of Abraham. And this week we are going to learn about someone kind of similar to Abraham. His name is Moses, and the 10 Commandments which God gave to Moses. You've probably heard about the 10 Commandments before, but they're a list of just God's laws for his people. And we're going to dive into that a little bit later, but you might have wondered, where did these 10 Commandments come from? Why should we listen to them? So we're going to talk about that today, why the 10 Commandments are so important and why they're more than just a set of rules. So originally, the 10 Commandments goes way, way back, like I said, to the story of Moses. And Moses was someone who, like Abraham, was really special to God, and he was chosen by God for a really special mission. So Moses' people, the Israelites, the Jewish people at the time, they were enslaved by the Egyptians. The Egyptians, they treated them terribly. They didn't have any freedom. So God chose Moses for the special mission to free the Israelite people and take them out of Egypt and to this place called the Promised Land, which is a special place for God's chosen people that God promised to give to the Jewish people, to the Israelites. Now, as we learned from last week, sometimes it can take a really long time for God to fulfill his promises, even though he always does. But sometimes he knows that we have to go through a journey first before getting to that thing that he's promised. So Moses led his people, through the help of God, out of the land of Egypt and into the desert to go find this promised land. And once they were out there, it took them a really long time to get there. But God had a plan for his people. So he told Moses to go up this mountain while the Jewish people were still in the desert, to go up this mountain. And Moses went up this mountain and he stayed there for 40 days and 40 nights. And when he came down, God had given Moses and the Israelite people a special gift of the 10 Commandments. So what we're going to do now is we're going to break down each of the commandments and kind of go over what they mean and what they are. And because when God gave these commandments to Moses, they weren't just, God was like, you know what, these people, they need some rules. I feel like just giving them some rules to follow. I'm just going to write up a list of 10 things and they have to do and just do whatever I say. No, that's not what happened. God's not like that. He gave these rules to the Israelite people and these commandments to them and to us because he knows what's good for us. And he knew that it's sometimes really hard for us to know what's right and know what's wrong. And it's hard to, even when we do know what's right and know what's wrong, to listen to God and be obedient and follow what God is asking of us to do. So to help his people and to help us, he wrote out these commandments so that we can grow closer to him and so that we can be truly happy, because that's what's at the root of these commandments. It's not that God just wants to tell us what to do and he wants to give us a big list of rules. It's he knows what is good for us and he knows what's going to make us happy. So these 10 commandments, rather than thinking about them as a list of rules of, don't do this, don't do that, they really are more like a roadmap to where we're destined to go, which is heaven. It's a roadmap to our own happiness. So we're going to break down each of the commandments, and then we're going to dive into why God gave us these commandments just a little bit more. So the first commandment is, I am the Lord your God, and you should not have any gods before me. So you might be thinking, well, this commandment, I'm pretty good at. I don't, worship false gods. That's something that they did in the Bible. They would build these pagan gods and worship someone that wasn't God. And that's true, that did happen in the Bible. But this commandment has a lot more to do with us than we might think, because even though you might not build a statue of some other god and start to worship it, what really God's saying in this commandment, he's saying, put me first. I want to be first in your life, because we actually worship a lot of things that aren't God. Maybe not intentionally, but we put them in a place in our lives and in our hearts that is above God. For instance, I know sometimes, I can put things like having fun, or watching your favorite my favorite TV show, or hanging out with friends, or doing other things that I like to do before God. Meaning that I don't give God the time that I should to pray, or give God the time that I should, to read the Bible. And we spend time doing other things, and through that, we're kind of putting those things above God, which is really what he's saying is here. He's saying that I want to be first in your life and in your heart, and I don't want you to worship anything else that isn't God. Even if those things are really good, he wants you to have those things, family, friends, good shows, all that stuff in your life, but it just can't come before God. So that's really what he's saying in that commandment, is to put him first. The second commandment is, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. So it's a lot of big words, but basically what that means is that we shouldn't use God's name and to swear in a way that is disrespectful. And that's something that people do a lot, and maybe they don't always realize what they're doing, or they don't mean to be disrespectful to God, but when we use God's name in vain, or say things like, oh my God, in a not reverent way, it is a sin, because God's name is the greatest name. It's the holiest of all names, and we shouldn't be using it in a way that isn't reverent, that isn't honoring and respectful of God. And also just all our language in general. I think just what God is saying here is to use our words in a way that is good and holy, so that all our language is just pleasing to God. The next commandment, the third one, is to keep holy the Sabbath. So by this, we can ask ourselves, do I go to Mass on Sunday? God asks us that we set aside Sunday as his day to worship him, to go to Mass, to have rest. So he asks us to keep holy his Sabbath, keep Sunday holy. So sometimes, even if we're going to Mass, though, we're not always respecting this commandment, because we can ask ourselves, well, I was at Mass, maybe you chose to go, maybe your parents made you go, but was I paying attention? Was I really trying to pray during Mass, or was I just kind of distracted and thinking about other things? I know sometimes I can get really distracted in Mass, and which is okay if, sometimes our mind wanders by accident, but we want to do our best to really pray and really be present during Mass, and that's what God is saying when he's saying to keep holy his Sabbath. Now, this fourth commandment, I bet you've heard it before, and I bet this is probably one of the hardest ones to follow, and it's honor your father and mother. Basically, God is saying, listen to your parents, which I think for a lot of us is definitely a really difficult one to follow every day, because it's hard to obey. It's hard to, always want to listen to your parents, but God is saying that your parents were given to you as a gift from him. It's important that we respect them and listen to them, and through being obedient to them, we're showing them that we love them. So even though this one is a big one, I think especially if you're a kid, it's a really important one, because that's probably one of the biggest ways God's asking you to try to be holy right now, is just by obeying your parents. The fifth commandment is, thou shalt not kill. And you might be thinking, okay, well, I'm good on this one. I've never killed anyone. I hope you haven't killed anyone. But this commandment, like the others, has a deeper meaning to it. Because even if we, don't kill people, what God is getting at is saying to treat others with respect, not to hurt people. So, if we're thinking about how well we're following each of these commandments, we can ask ourselves, well, maybe, I don't kill people, but do we sometimes hit our siblings if we get mad? Or do we sometimes hurt people with our words? Are we unkind to our friends, to our siblings, to our parents, in the way we talk to them? So when examining our conscience with the Ten Commandments, this one can seem one that we can just brush off and be like, I'm good, I don't kill people. But it's important to take a closer look and just ask ourselves, well, have I hurt people? in my actions or in my words. The next commandment is to not commit an adultery. So you might be thinking, okay, what is an adultery? Well, this commandment in a lot of ways is a little bit more geared towards adults, but basically an adultery is when a married person, is unfaithful, not faithful to their husband or to their wife. So that's in general what not committing adultery means, but a way that we can apply that to our own lives is God is asking that we respect our bodies and the bodies of other people. So we can just ask ourselves, have I been respectful of other people's bodies? Have I been respectful of my body? And just remember that as we go throughout our life and throughout our day. The next two commandments are, thou shalt not steal and thou shalt not lie. So these ones are pretty self-explanatory, right? God's asking us to not take things that aren't ours. Even if it's just something small, it's important that we practice following these commandments in little ways, because if we don't follow these commandments in little ways, it's going to be easier and easier to not follow them in big ways. So to not steal or to lie in big ways or in little ways. The next two commandments are, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, and thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods. So basically what that means, the word covet, is to, want something that someone else has. So he's telling us to not be envious or jealous of what other people have. And this can be hard sometimes, and so maybe your friend got this new PlayStation that you really wanted, or got this really cool new toy or new phone or whatever it is. It can be really hard to not just be jealous of that. And it's okay, to sometimes be like, man, I wish I had that. But we don't want to get to the point where we're really angry and upset when someone has something that we don't have. So to avoid any kind of jealousy or envy in our lives, we don't want to covet the things that other people have. So those are all the 10 commandments. Hopefully, we went over them in a way that applies to your life and makes sense to you. You might be thinking, that is a lot of rules. Maybe you're someone that doesn't really like rules. I know I'm that way sometimes. I don't always want to follow a bunch of rules. You might be like, I just want to be free to do whatever I want. I don't want to have to follow all these rules. And the truth is that you are free. God gave us a thing that we call free will, which means that He's not going to force us to do anything. We can choose if we want to do what's right or do what's wrong. So God, because He loves us, gave us that freedom. He's not going to force us to do what He wants us, but He gave us these rules because He knows what's good for us. And the reason why He knows what's good for us is because He made us, right? Think about it. Think about someone who created an invention. Let's think of the person who created the iPhone, right? I think that's probably Steve Jobs. Anyway, so the person that created the iPhone, right? He probably knows better than anyone else how that machine, how that phone works, how to make it work in the best way possible, what to not do with it, what to do with it, right? Because He made it. He knows exactly everything about it. And He knows what's good and what's bad for it. And if the person who created the iPhone said, hey, you probably shouldn't put your phone in water, right? Because it's going to ruin it. What if you could be like, well, I'm going to do it anyway? What would happen? It would break, right? Because that person, they told you not to do it, not because they just wanted to boss you around, but because they knew what was good for their creation. And in the same way, God knows what's good for us. So He gave us these rules because He knows what's going to make us happy. And like I said earlier, we can think of these commandments as a bunch of lists of things to do or things not to do, or we can think of them as signposts on our journey to heaven, as signposts on our journey towards our ultimate happiness and ultimate joy. And, like we're traveling on any journey, if we're driving down the road, we don't have to listen to the signs. Maybe you're headed to, let's say you're headed to Disney World, and it says, all right, Disney World, turn right. you don't have to listen to that sign. You can keep on driving past it, but will you get to Disney World? Probably not, which is why it's important to listen to those signposts in the same way it's important to listen to God's commandments to get to heaven, to get to happiness. So that is kind of an overview of the Ten Commandments. I hope you all learned today. We have some discussion questions. The homework is going to be the same as last week. Just discuss with your family. Go over the discussion questions that I'm going to send out in the email. And talk about the Ten Commandments with your family. You know, which ones are easier to follow, which ones are harder to follow. And, you know, the ones that are harder to follow, ask God to give you the help and the grace that you need to follow those commandments so that you can lead a more joyful, happier, fulfilled life that's closer to God and closer to Jesus. I hope you all have a great week. Bye, guys.